suppose one of the things that must be very difficult in the role of CISO is cutting through the noise as well. And I think sales and marketing have done no favors in this industry whatsoever, because it becomes impossible to kind of cut through the fact and the fiction to work out what you do really need or what someone that in marketing has told you do need. And I think that that's also become a massive problem, is to figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, it's definitely not been helped by all the machine learning and artificial intelligence that's sprinkled over virtually every product out there.
That's it.
Yeah, I actually gave a talk of last year, or it seems like a long time ago now, but I gave a talk about essentially the age of AI. Now, the age of AI, not meaning we are in the age of AI, but literally, what is the age of AI? And what are you willing to entrust it with in terms of the type of decisions you want it to make, right? So I think you would make radically different choices if the age of AI were a 5-year-old versus a 13-year-old versus an 18-year-old versus a 25-year-old, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And so if we can actually calibrate the age of AI towards something that we can relate to, we start making better decisions on, am I truly going to entrust something that some marketing person told me to this potentially a pretty critical decision that may cause business impact? Now, if it's a 5-year-old, I'm going to be much more wary than if the age of AI is a 25-year-old, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I created a way to understand what is the age of AI using all these different frameworks to then benchmark it. And my conclusion, just to jump ahead of it, is that it's still somewhere like in the adolescent phase before teens. So if you entrust an 8-year-old to wield a gun or to wield a knife and make decisions on what malware to kill, okay, well, there you go.
Yeah,
you've made that's the risk posture that you're taking based on trusting an 8-year-old to make those decisions for you.
I feel that like there needs to be a lot more. I absolutely think that vendors and the security community outside of the CISO have created a rod for their own back by using so much sort of fear and uncertainty and doubt in their sales methods and their marketing gumph. But equally, I do feel that like we do need to find a way of bringing vendors and CISOs and everybody back together again, because I think that if we don't, we're doomed. Like we've got to work together. We need to share all this knowledge and experience that we've got. And I think if we get this dynamic of like the CISO being impossible for a security vendor, especially some of the smaller startup vendors to ever engage with, I think that that's not going to lead to the innovation we need to become more effective in keeping the threats out. So I think we need to do more to try and actually bring that community back together again. I think it's damaging.
Yeah, and I'm a very strong proponent of open source, and in particular, having companies build off of open source in such a way that they add additional value that would otherwise be difficult for a CISO to create on their own, or at least would require a significant commitment on their own to put in. Now, why would I care about open source? Well, you kind of hit upon it earlier. One of the things that we lack in security is, one of the things that we struggle with in security is sharing knowledge more consistently across practitioners. We share information, but we don't actually share knowledge. And let me explain the difference here.
Yeah.
Information here is, actually, let me start with data. Data is IP address. Okay, here's an IP address. Information is, this IP address is bad. Okay. Knowledge is, how did you discover this IP address? How did you discover that this IP address is bad? And we actually lack consistent ways to be able to share that type of knowledge across practitioner communities. But I think open source provides a proxy for being able to share that knowledge across practitioner environments. And so if you have a whole bunch of proprietary vendor solutions that come out here, then yeah, that's unfortunately not in the long run, I don't think it's necessarily helping us really get to where we need to go. Ultimately, security is a situation where it's an ecosystem problem, and we need ecosystem type of solutions that help everyone, help the tide rise all boats.
Right.
And any one particular company that falls behind ends up being a liability for all of us as well.
Right.
So anyway, a focus
really
on open source is something that I would strongly advocate.
So one of the things when we think about, we talk about the beginning is this decision-making process, like how as a CISO you determine what vendors you need, what vendors you don't. Like where would you start? Do you start with the problem or do you start with a strategy? Like how does that fit? Like do you go to analysts? Do you refer to partners? Where do you start as a CISO?
Well, I think it's probably most people will start with the problem because that's what's causing some degree of pain today.
A tactical problem? You mean like, as in like, this is Stunger's, that's where it starts. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we all strive for a strategic view, right? I mean, that's if you're in a leadership position, that's expected that you provide a strategic view of what does my program look like today? Where do I need it to go tomorrow? And people can look at maturity charts and different ways to calibrate against that. But there's also another perspective that I have around the progression of a company over time. So oftentimes we have organizations that, especially startups, they will have a much more risk-taking posture. Those smaller companies are less regulated. They have less compliance burdens. And as such, they can take a more risk-taking posture. And when we look at the 5 functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, I'm going to actually spend less on protect and potentially more on detect and respond because I don't want to inhibit my engineers. I don't want to slow down the business. I'm in a startup phase, and I need to make sure that I can make money, right?
That's right,
to survive. And so we're going to generally take a more risk-taking posture, which means that I'm going to be less. I'm going to invest less in the protective solutions and potentially more in the detect and respond. However, over time, as the company gets larger, as we start seeing more compliance burdens, and as the organization matures, I'm going to start taking a more risk-averse posture. And we start seeing a shift from just spending mostly on detect and respond and more on the protective side. And that's something that has to be done hand in hand with the business, because as you start putting in more protective measures, it starts disrupting workflows and so on and so forth.
Okay.
What you really want to be able to do is just as a CISO, as a practitioner, to anticipate those sort of macro movements and put into your strategy, okay, this is where we want to be tied to where the business is, so that when the business gets to the point where they need to be FIPS compliant, or they need to have a SOC 2 certification, or they need to go for ISO, whatever, okay, that your program is ready to be able to handle the burdens that are associated with that.